I think he also did like really well against Ben Shapiro, especially in hindsight. Like,
so I want to lay out a case for you and why I think that Schedule F, which is what Trump implemented towards the end of his first term, could be used to, what you were saying, erode our institutions in this country.
Scale of 1 to 10, how vindicated are you feeling right now with what we've seen from?
Unfortunately, like 11, but I wish I wasn't vindicated.
Then Obama says publicly, oh, I guess we can't do the public option. Wink, and they immediately took it out of the bill.
Right?
What's that?
That's because of Joe Lieberman, right? But
59
other Democrats would have voted for the
Okay,
public
see,
option.
that's exactly what I'm talking about.
I've become even more triggered about this in the aftermath of the Jubilee debate, because like the more I've researched the topic, I did like a deep dive into the ACA and like Joe Lieberman, all this stuff, and I'm like, I gave him actually too much charitability, even in that argument where like,
I don't think we're an oligarchy, but under Trump, I think that's becoming more and more, more true, right? Like we see.
Yeah, like how do you bridge the gap of having the efficacy of populist messaging without actually having some of the brain dead economic policy of populism? So like,
if you want to help me continue to produce content, liking and subscribing is greatly appreciated. Also make sure to check out my Discord server, linked down below, where you can also find my Twitch, my Kick, and my Twitter. All right, well, my man, what's up? Welcome to my stream. I don't know if you've seen any of it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course,
I caught your reaction to my Lila Rose conversation, the abortion surrounded. So, I recognized you when you hit me up.
Yeah, hell yeah. Some of my audience recognizes you at least because you've been on
a
number of Jubilee episodes by now. I know you've been on a lot of the surroundings. You were on Candice Owens. You were on the Ben Shapiro one, the Lila Rose one. Most recently, Cenk Uygur. Are you on? I don't know if you were on any other. I know those that are surrounded. You're on.
I've been on a couple middle ground episodes, and I might be in a few if they have like a roundtable series where it's like 4 people. I might be in a few of those coming up. But yeah, it's been like 5 or 6 so far.
Man, you just keep getting them. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's like obviously I've seen the surrounding ones at least. I think you've done like a incredible job in all of them. I don't know, like I remember like if you've seen if you watch some of the abortion one, like I think like you were definitely the ones making the best arguments there for that one. I feel like
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's not like
that abortion video kind of gassed me up. Like all the comments are like, "This is the best pro-choice argument I've ever heard," which is like, I watched a lot of Lila Rose's debates to prepare for her, and I feel like people say she's like a good abortion debater, but I honestly was like kind of underwhelmed with some of her arguments there. But that's been my general experience with meeting these people in real life.
Yeah. I think you also did really well. I think you also did like really well against Ben Shapiro, especially in hindsight. Like you talking to Ben Shapiro about him being Trump being like a threat to American institutions and being a threat to the civil service and our independent agencies. Just scale of 1 to 10. How vindicated are you feeling right now with what we've seen from?
Unfortunately, like 11, but I wish I wasn't vindicated. Like I always used to say during the 2024 campaign, like when MAGA people are like, you're fear mongering, I'm like, I wish, like, I hope I'm wrong and Trump ends up not doing any of this stuff. But it's so funny. Shapiro told me like Matt Gaetz isn't really part of the Republican Party. He's not mainstream. And then Trump appoints him for like attorney general. And it's like, okay, dude, what are we doing?
I know. Yeah. We've seen so many things that, the more like centrist type people for whatever reason, like just didn't think would happen. And I don't know. It's especially frustrating that like, I think you see like the, type of like centrist or like moderate people that care like so much about what they view as like the fourth branch of government, the bureaucracy, all this stuff that they are like, I can't vote for Kamala Harris just because I know she'll like expand federal government power. They just don't care about like any of the existing bureaucracy being like so heavily weaponized by people like Donald Trump.
In the conservative Democrats.
I do a lot of TikTok debates, and one thing that I've learned as I talk to Trump supporters is like they only hate the deep state when it's like not them. But now that Trump is fully the deep state, it's like, yeah, but that's not actually the deep state. The deep state is like the people that I don't like.
I know. Yeah. It's obviously insane to me, and like it's not even like I think truly, I can understand a little bit of the criticism of not liking, how much the federal government has expanded or whatever. But like, truly, I can't imagine. It's very hard for me to even see someone thinking that like the threat of like Kamala Harris making a new welfare program and hiring 10,000 new bureaucrats or whatever is a bigger threat than like Donald Trump, shutting down agencies essentially unilaterally. Firing the head of the commissioner of the BLS and then appointing a new one who is insane. truthfully, that is a very hard thing for me to understand, and I wish Ben Shapiro would at least admit he's wrong on that now. But
he bothers me the most out of all of them because he knows better. Like if you go back to the 2016 election cycle, he was going on Jesse Lee Peterson's show and debating him on Trump being like fit for the office, and all the stuff he was saying back then, like he's gonna basically be prone to flattery on the world stage. He has no idea what he's doing. His character is like extremely lacking. He's cheated on all his wives. He's like a fraudster, a scammer. He knows all this stuff, but now because it's like the audience capture, he can never really turn on Trump ever. I feel like he has trouble going to sleep at night. He has to know what he's doing.
Exactly. I think audience capture for Ben Shapiro is probably a really big thing. I don't see, because he does know better, I don't see many other explanations there. And I guess on that, on our concerns about maybe the media environment, I'm curious, do you think I'm curious, first of all, how much you personally enjoy doing the Jubilee episodes. Presumably you got to enjoy them because you keep going on them. But also, do you think they actually play a positive role, or do we think they've, maybe they're a little bit toxic? I think they do play a positive role. Like, I even remember one of the times they interview. So usually how it works is you apply for an episode. They have like a Google form on their website, and then they'll like hit you up to do like an interview over Zoom. And one of the times they asked me like, hey, do you think that we like platform people that shouldn't be platformed? Like, because we get a lot of backlash about this, which this was before the Mehdi Hassan episode where like the straight up Nazis and stuff. And I kind of told them that like, I only think that platforming is an issue if you're platforming an idea that's not mainstream or not known. But with a lot of these far right crazies, unfortunately, they do comprise like at least maybe 20% of the voting bloc in this country, unfortunately. So when ideas are this mainstream, you can't ignore them as much. If it's like a race realist person, you probably can ignore them. But if it's like, I think we should have tariffs and we should like fully do mass deportations. 20 years ago, maybe you don't want to platform that person. Now that, that school of thought is in the White House. So I feel like you have to go on these platforms. And what I found with Jubilee is like, a lot of normies who don't watch political content, like at least like a lot of my friends, I'm the only one in my friend group who's like really into politics. Jubilee sometimes is like the only way they interact with politics because it's like this blood sport entertainment aspect, which brings in a lot of people who don't normally pay attention. And I feel like it's a good place to try to like win over hearts and minds of like more casual audiences. Right. Yeah. That's something that's definitely interesting to me because I'm probably the only one really hardcore into politics in like my IRL friend group, at least. Obviously, I know a lot of people online.
Sure.
And like a lot of the times, like I don't think some of the conversations that go on in Jubilee are like that meaningful. They're not very in depth. Like they're not type of conversations necessarily I want to see. But at the same time, like, I'm glad my younger brother, who is only 10 years old, like knows who Dean is, right? And like we'll watch Dean like debate people on Jubilee, right? And I'm glad at least some of my friend group will like get those clips on their TikTok feed. At least when liberals do well, that's probably a positive thing.
And I'll actually say like it is true that Jubilee and a lot of these formats they dumb down political conversations and bring them up to like a really surface level. But I feel like that's a good thing in the sense that most people, unfortunately, engage with politics in that way. That's why Trump won, is that he speaks on a surface level. There's no nuance. And it's like, whether or not you think he's a dumbass, he's like, you kind of know what he's for. Like, you know what his thing is. It's immigration, it's tariffs. Like, there's no confusion there. And I think one place where like the center left, and even like progressives have not done a great job is being able to communicate like you're not giving a college lecture and just talk to like a normal person. And like that's why I do TikTok mainly, is like you need to be able to get across your ideas in like 90 seconds or less. That's like the world we live in now, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I agree with that. The unfortunate thing, I feel like I just have for the policies I like, at least, I just have never found a very good way to explain them in 90 seconds. Like, I feel like I could almost like never get the median American voter on board for a lot of my policies, simply because like, I guess a lot of my worldview, and probably some of yours to an extent, is not framed around like there's, sort of like one holistic like evil or whatever, globalization, the immigrants, even the hardcore progressive lefts, the billionaires, or the root
donor
of all
class. Yeah,
the donor class, exactly. Yeah. Well, don't worry, we'll talk about Cenk.
yeah.
I don't know. It's just been very hard to try to communicate. So the more like nuanced things that I want to do in 90 seconds, which is why,
Yeah, that's fair. And I think part of that is like there's kind of a structural disadvantage against especially center left people. And I think a lot of people get the impression that I'm like a very moderate Democrat. I actually think I'm pretty progressive. I'm not like Bernie Sanders progressive, but I would say I'm like somewhere between like Pete Buttigieg and like Elizabeth Warren, like somewhere between them, which I don't know that there's much of a voice for that in the actual Democratic Party. But I think that like when you're talking about tax credits and like all these percentages and these like minute details of like our fiscal policy, it's like you're just at a disadvantage because like you have to know so much before that to get to the point of like why is a tax credit a good thing? What is a fully refundable tax credit versus one that's not, like the child tax credit? Like as soon as you get that deep into it, most people have tuned out, which is why I think like there does need to be also a shift in like how we talk about policy, and like instead of calling it a child tax credit, say like if you have a kid, we're going to send you money. And that is kind of the same thing, but like it's a lot more understandable, I think, to the average person.
Yeah. I feel like to some extent what the Democrats are missing is, it's just bold policies that can be summed up in, one line.
Yeah.
And I do think, and maybe this touches on like what you talked to Cenk about as well. Like I do think like it's probably a whole lot easier to message on just like universal healthcare, Medicare for all. Yeah. Even when Americans might not know everything, all about what that means, and even if what you get accomplished in office maybe is a more toned back version of that initially bold policy, because you do have to make the type of compromises. And
that actually, by the way, kind of worked for Trump, at least with his base. Like he ran in his first term and like, I'm going to build a wall across the entire border. What does he end up doing? Like kind of a little maintenance project across like 15% of the existing fence. But if you ask a Trump supporter, why do you like Trump's first term? Oh, he built the wall because he messaged on it and there's like a picture of a wall-like thing that he can post on his Twitter. And as far as the average person's concerned, that's a political win for them. So I feel like Democrats can sort of start to use those same tricks as well.
Right. I did really like when Biden, like, he started putting up like signs, for projects that his infrastructure bill funded.
Yes.
That made sure that voters knew like this bridge is being built because of the infrastructure bill. And I think things like that are, it's probably important. I feel like Democrats really struggle at achieving things that are like actually like salient to voters. Even if like, I do think of like Democrats just have like a type of fundamental decency that most of the Republican Party like doesn't have anymore. They're not attacking American institutions. Like, unfortunately, like the destruction of like USAID or whatever, for all that good, that did, that's just like not a salient thing to American voters. American voters probably like just
which is unfortunate because I think like hundreds of thousands of like African children are now going to die because they're not getting treatment for like tuberculosis or malaria or whatever else it is. So it is kind of crazy that unfortunately it's maybe not a winning issue to talk about foreign aid like that. But the thing you said about infrastructure is so true. One of the freeways I often drive, I'm in Michigan, they repaved it. It is now one of the smoothest roads around here. And there's like a big green sign, this road was paved by the bipartisan infrastructure law. And every time I drive by it, I'm like, why don't they do this for everything, like everywhere? This is like such a good strategy to like, Trump's whole thing is like branding, put your name on every single thing. On the stimulus checks, the fact that Biden didn't push to have his name on the $1,400 check that we got from him, which is more than Trump ever gave anyone, is in hindsight like political suicide. Because like, I think honestly, if Biden's name was just on those checks, I think we see a very different election cycle in 2024. Even though it's like not a huge thing, I think it would have made very big waves in the actual electorate.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, it's incredibly annoying that, like I said, I think when Democrats get things accomplished, a lot of times they're not very salient to voters, and then they don't want to take credit for it. It was incredibly annoying, even if I think that the inflation during the 2020 was probably going to have a negative effect on Biden or Kamala, whoever ran, even if Biden signed those checks or whatever. Obviously,
even if Trump won in 2020, the inflation was going to be on him then. Yeah,
exactly. I think I think Democrats need to start doing more things like that. I do also think it's like a big issue is that Democrats, especially on a state level, kind of struggle to get a lot of things done. Like I don't know how much you know about me. So like I am like a I don't want to say like a more moderate Democrat simply because truly I do feel like in my ideal world like government spending is probably like 30% of GDP and like it's probably a lot more progressive than a lot of the moderate Democrats want. But I do really think blue states have like struggled to get things done. Like California high-speed rail has been very slow. It's been tied up in so many environmental reviews. It's way too easy to sue people to get to stop people from doing things. Housing affordability is a big issue. I think obviously I think those are big issues as well. And
you're abundance filled.
I am mostly abundance filled. Yeah, obviously I am.
Okay.
I am.
Okay.
I'm half quoted for that. I don't know your feelings on that. Actually,
no,
I'm curious.
I totally agree. Yeah. I think like I'm not done with the book yet. I have the audiobook, but like one thing that I've heard them mention a lot, which I think is it's Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. I think that I think they're super spot on about this. Is like, and I'm like a huge economics nerd. I have an economics degree, so I like getting into the weeds on this stuff. And like, if you're going to do something that subsidizes demand, that's not just fine, it's a good thing, but you usually have to pair that with increasing the elasticity of the supply, because if supply is stagnant and aggregate demand goes up, you are just going to see inflation, which is like why when you look at the inflation after COVID, there is some grain of truth that stimulus probably did increase demand somewhat, but the reason that increase in demand caused so much inflation is because it was paired with like all these supply chain bottlenecks, which then is like you have two forces acting in the same direction, sort of. So like I think like Josh Shapiro is like a great example of how to do this right. I'm forgetting what the specific example is, but there was some bridge or road or something that like he said if we went through the normal channels, this would have taken us like 5 years, and he got it rebuilt in like I think like 2 weeks or something, which is like these things can be done if there's a political will there. And like you're saying, you can reform some of these like environmental reviews and all these different boards on all these different levels that have to give approvals, and then you have union contracts and like Ezra Klein talks about when you're building affordable housing, it's like why does affordable housing cost more than market rate housing to build? Like the incentive structure there just doesn't make any sense on its face.
Exactly right, and I think Democrats have really struggled to do with it to deal with that, especially because like one of the things mentioned in abundance, I don't know if you got to this part, is like the everything bagel liberalism. Yeah, where part of the reason, not the whole reason or anything, that like it's expensive for the government to build affordable housing is because we require like you have to buy from local businesses, you have to use unions, you want a black-owned business or a BIPOC-owned business or whatever. And there's definitely there are a lot of progressive Democrats who are going to stand up to any trying to remove any of those features, even if the goal.
Even thanks to Biden, I think we got the $15 minimum wage for federal contractors, right? So that's a good thing on one hand, but you can also see how that might raise production costs for government projects. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And that's one thing, that's another thing, actually, I don't think it was you and Cenk talked about. It was that Z-Girl talked about with Cenk was, how Biden did get that accomplished in office. Now, obviously, when you talked to Cenk, I think you talked about, I think the first thing you talked about was the ACA and why Cenk is so, he said, it's reductive to think that the thing, like the ACA was just a pressure release valve that didn't actually help. Didn't actually help people that much. Why do you think? I'm curious. Well, both. Not that you didn't explain this, but why that view is wrong, and then why do you think that view is like so popular among people? Why do you think it appeals to people?
I've become even more triggered about this in the aftermath of the Jubilee debate, because like the more I've researched the topic, I did like a deep dive into the ACA and like Joe Lieberman, all this stuff, and I'm like, I gave him actually too much charitability even in that argument where like he was just so wrong. So like number one, his claim was like Democrats and Republicans agree on economic issues, and this is an extremely popular belief, especially with like lay people that don't follow politics closely. And I think the reason for that is maybe a lot of the big policy changes we've seen, it's like the saying that like when things are working well, you don't really notice them. So like a lot of people, especially in Gen Z, that are like around my age, like I was maybe 8 or 9 when the ACA was passed. So like no one really had, and this view is most popular with people that are like kind of like around my age group. People don't remember, I don't remember, but I know this is a fact that like if you had a pre-existing condition before, you were just completely cooked. Like you're never going to get health insurance. If you lucked into getting it before you got the condition from like your employer, then maybe. And there's all these things where like once you hit a certain age, you get kicked off your parents' plans. And then a big part of the ACA was also patient protections and ensuring that like people are not being basically exploited because with healthcare you have like inelastic demand, so these insured and these healthcare providers have like a lot of wiggle room to do some shady stuff, and you can't really protest too much because if you need the healthcare, you need the healthcare. So I think one aspect of it is people just don't have a reference point to like what were things like before Dodd-Frank and the ACA and the all these pieces of legislation that we've gotten under Democrats. And because they don't have that reference point, they just see rhetoric, and they just think it's just rhetoric. And the unfortunate thing also is like populism is very easy to sell. You don't have to get into the weeds. You don't have to be particularly smart to sell populism. You can just say it's the good guys versus the bad guys. We have to defeat Thanos, and then we can snap our fingers and everyone's going to have healthcare, free dental, like everything's going to be awesome. And people like hearing that, and they don't have a counterfactual to compare it to. And there's also all these false narratives that are now baked into our premises when we have a conversation. So like this idea that in 2020, Bernie was going to be the nominee, and then just out of nowhere, Biden and Obama brought down the hammer on him. I think that narrative has a lot more truth to it in 2016, where the primary between Bernie and Hillary was actually pretty close, way more than people thought. If you look back at 2020, Biden kind of crushed Bernie. It was pretty embarrassing because even when everyone else dropped out, if you can't win a one-on-one race, if you can't get a majority there, these excuses of like, I needed 5 other people to be in the field so I could win with a 35% share of the vote. Like, there are all these narratives and all these premises that I think are now just taken for granted that contribute to what you're saying, where people want to draw these false equivalencies. So like, you need to do like a lot of deprogramming, I think, and let people know 2020 primary was not stolen. There was political maneuvering that happened. That's just politics. If Bernie was smart, he would have gotten those endorsements and done that to Biden, right? Like, you make concessions, you make friendships. And like before the ACA, healthcare was pretty shit in this, not pretty shit, but like pretty bad in this country. So you have to deconstruct the premise that people start from. And I think Cenk takes advantage of the fact that people kind of are starting from the wrong place, and he builds on top of that. And that's why it's so hard to fight people like Cenk, is like, you can't fight them on the top line issue. You have to deconstruct the 10 layers below that, which he just takes as a given.
Right. That's it. By the way, one thing I found interesting about the 2016 primary a little bit when I looked into it. Obviously, like, there's always political maneuvering in primaries. It's a invisible primary, before the primary, where candidates are deciding whether or not to run. I think like, to some extent, the fact that Hillary Clinton was, sort of just the expected winner of the 2016 primary, and a lot of people didn't want to run against her, actually probably benefited Bernie, because he got like a lot more airtime when there's only like 5 candidates up on that stage or whatever. That probably at least in the long run actually benefited Bernie, even if he obviously wasn't able to get through in 2016 or 2020. And I think I do want to comment on another thing that Cenk said, which I find incredibly frustrating. He mentions all these, all this polling data. Oh, paid family leave polls at, 74%. Everyone wants Medicaid for all. Everyone wants all these policies, but Democrats don't get it done. So explain to us, Adam, why Democrats are failing us and not getting the most popular policies.
Because of the donor class. Yeah, it's all the donor class and the billionaires, which, like, that conversation was annoying to me also, because I hate having to take the opposition to that, because I do think that there's a valid conversation to have about the influence of money in politics, but it's a very nuanced conversation, and no one ever wants to have it be nuanced. So, like, moneyed interest is this one blob, and it's inconceivable that, like, moneyed interest could be conflicting. Like, you have a solar company and an oil company are probably not on the same side of an issue when it comes to funding, but specifically on why don't Democrats get this stuff done. I think, like, there are so many issues here where, like, Joe Lieberman is like a big part of this, where they had I think Democrats for a very short period of time, I think like barely 2 months, had 60 people in their caucus after Obama won. And Lieberman wasn't even a Democrat. He was an independent that caucused with them. And, like, Cenk's thing of, like, if we just appeal to these public opinion polls and then use those as leverage against these people like Joe Manchin or Joe Lieberman, apparently the Joes are doing a lot of the blockading here for some reason, that's just going to turn their mind on this, and they're going to vote for it. If you actually go back to 2009, 2010, if we had Democrats publicly campaigning against Joe Lieberman, I don't know why Cenk thinks that he would just cuck himself and be like, I'm so sorry. I never saw those public opinion polls. So sorry, Obama. I'll vote for it now. He's going to fight back harder. He's going to dig his heels in and say, if you're going to now publicly shame me in my home state, I'm going to double down against you. Because a lot of these Democrats, what they don't understand is they'll win in states and their entire claim to fame is like, I'm going to be the enlightened Democrat that keeps my party in check. That's what Joe Manchin's brand was. That's what Joe Lieberman's brand was. And when someone's entire political brand and all their political capital stems from, I'm going to buck the Democrats, you can't just bully them into submission. Like, if anything, you have to make concessions. Like, maybe we tell Lieberman, we're going to give you a big subsidy in your state, wherever the fuck you want, if you vote for the public option. That, in my mind, makes a lot more sense than, like, let's shit on Joe Lieberman. And these public opinion polls, the issue with them is, like, there are so many different layers upon which consensus is formed. So, like, if you ask people, should good things happen and should the government prevent bad things, you're going to get, like, 100% yes. And then you can dig deeper. Should the government ensure everyone has health care? Maybe you get 80% yes. And then once you get down to, like, should the government ban private insurance and increase your taxes to establish one government insurer, which maybe your tax increase is going to be less than the premiums you were paying, so it's a net benefit. That is a way different sell than should people have health care. And Cenk just doesn't get that.
Right, exactly. I also think he like, a lot of moderate Democrats, like, I think generally just have, like they do have beliefs, and a lot of those beliefs are stupid, but, like, nonetheless, like, they have them, and that does inform the voting decision. So I think Joe Manchin, like, was concerned that, like, people would use child tax credit money for drugs, right? And it's like, well, I think that's stupid. Like, I think probably less than 1% of people who get that will do that. And, like, you know, it's, on the whole, that's, like, a really good thing still.
Exactly, yeah.
But that, like, is an actual belief he has. So, like, just that informs his decision. Like, the politicians are not 100% subject to the donor class, obviously.
That's like, this is a West Virginia Democrat. Like, what do you think we're going to get out of West Virginia? I'd rather have Joe Manchin than a Republican, which now I think Joe Manchin became an independent, right? And now we're never going to get another Democrat in West Virginia, at least for the foreseeable future. So, like, there's just, again, it's just, they live in a fantasy world. They don't understand, like, very basic political constraints. And if you tell them the political constraints, this is one thing he kept saying to me is, like, the people are sick of hearing I can't from the Democrats. Like, why aren't you guys pushing? And it's like, actually, if you want single payer healthcare, you need to understand these constraints to get it passed. Like, I want pretty big progressive legislation, but I think you're doing yourself a disservice when you pretend I could get it done in 2 weeks. Put me in Congress. Dude, you got 1% in the Democratic primary. What are you going to get done in Congress? Like, it's just so divorced from reality.
Right, exactly. And people, I mean, like one thing Cenk mentioned, and I'm mentioning this because I recognize someone in my chat, okay, who is a Cenk Uygur defender, okay. You know, that Obama, when Obama had 60 votes in the Senate, you know, he could have gotten anything done, right? And those, I don't even think he had that much time to do it. Like, you know, in the month or whatever, we had a trifecta. Why didn't we get the ultimate single payer healthcare and the $15 minimum wage? Why didn't we get all of these progressive policies immediately when Obama had his trifecta in government?
Yep. Yeah. And, like, even with, like, the public option specifically, I wish I knew this when I wanted to talk to Cenk. The public option actually passed Congress. Like, the initial version of the ACA, back when they were doing this back and forth, the version that passed Congress did have the public option. And I think a public option even made it past one of the Senate committees. And then at the very last step, Lieberman says, I'm not going to let this go through the filibuster unless you remove it. And then it's like they're on a deadline. I'm trying to look up, like, how long did Obama even have 60 votes? And I'm pretty sure this was, like, when you take into account all the processing times and, like, the wheeling and dealing, like, there's just no actual time here. Maybe if Obama had, like, 1 year of having 60, then you say, okay, let's try to get Lieberman to move on this. But it's like, you miss that window of opportunity, and then there's no ACA at all. So it's like, you have to be able to also, like, make decisions in the heat of the moment. And, like, I like Cenk also. Like, he was a nice guy. Like, after, one thing that pissed me off is after the cameras turned off, he was like, you made a lot of really good points. And I'm like, why the fuck didn't you say that when we were actually talking, if you think these are good points? But yeah, I kind of forgot where this started. But, like, yeah, I like Cenk also, but I just think he's, like, kind of grifting right now and just doesn't. I think it's grifting and not stupidity, because he's been in politics for, like, since I was born, he's been covering politics. There's no way he doesn't understand what political capital is and, like, what the filibuster is. I just don't believe that.
Right, exactly. I don't really exactly. That's why I don't understand his mindset, and I don't I don't get what he's trying to do. Maybe he's just trying to he want to make you make good points, okay? Because he has to propagandize the audience, okay? I do want to maybe talk about sort of like I said, I'm a semi-moderate Democrat, so I do want to talk about maybe one thing that concerns me, the Democrats that I think like actually do have really good messaging, is that I feel like because they rely on this populist rhetoric, a lot of their policy is just what I would say is like suboptimal, right? So like, even on healthcare, I don't even like. I'm probably not like 100% like single payer guy. Now I think I would have a public option. I don't think I would support something like Bernie's plan. I think we see Democrats like you see Democrats like the like Kat Abigazela girl. I don't know if you know who she is. She's like a progressive Democrat, like running she has a big like Twitter campaign following and everything. And like, I think her messaging is really good. And I do want her to win a primary because the alternative is like an 80-year-old Democrat who I think is going to die in office. But at the same time, I feel like her tax policy of a 2% wealth tax, I don't think it's a particularly good policy. We see people like Zorhan. I think I would vote for Zorhan if I lived in New York, but campaigning on a rent freeze, I think it's bad policy.
Sure.
I guess I don't know how the Democrats are supposed to move forward when the populist rhetoric is so popular, but the policy it relies on tends to be pretty bad.
Sure, yeah. Like, how do you bridge the gap of having the efficacy of populist messaging without actually having some of the brain dead economic policy of populism? So like, there's a few things there. So like, I think wealth taxes, unrealized gains taxes are like extremely, extremely stupid. I'm hopeful that like people say like, oh, Kamala had an unrealized whatever tax in her platform, but like that's never passing Congress anywhere in any state, even California. I don't think would pass something like that. I think the populist messaging at its core is just kind of like how I was saying in the beginning. You just have to make things really reductive and really simple and try your best to not sacrifice good policy and like nuance in the process, which is like a very hard needle to thread. So like when it comes to Zoran, I would have voted for him in the primary and I'd vote for him in the general as well. I don't support like the rent freeze, but I've also seen him talk about like he's like abundance pilled also. I think he went on Derek Thompson's podcast and he was talking about like we need to build more public and private housing. So then I'm like, okay, am I willing to accept like a temporary rent freeze if it coincides with us developing a lot more public and private housing? Yeah, that trade-off is probably worth it. So then in that case, I'm like, am I okay with some of these Democrats having one or two sort of like leftist policies that I think are probably not great? The answer is probably yes, if the rest of their policy is really good. And then also they have to, there's like roadblocks preventing them from going full leftist with their economic policy. And then when it comes to like, for example, like healthcare stuff, I think Bernie's plan is just like very quick, just immediate shift towards single payer, which doesn't make sense. I think Warren's plan was like, we're going to decrease the Medicare eligibility age like decade by 10 years. That makes a little more sense to me. Where I think we need to go for healthcare is like you establish a public option and then you engage in predatory pricing where the public option just outcompetes every single private insurer by operating at a loss for a little bit. And then through that, you basically, over the course of a few years, all the private insurance companies start to go bankrupt and the government bails them out and buys them up, and then you have single payer eventually. That's kind of my ideal system here, is like you use the public option to use competition to force these insurers out of the market. So like with populist messaging, like I do agree there's a risk there, but I think it's like there's enough counterbalances there and enough counterweights there to ensure that we're not going too far off the deep end, especially when now the Overton window has shifted so far to the right. We're like, I don't mind someone kind of dragging a little more to the left, even if we don't go all the way to that extent. I think people like Zoran, even like Bernie, like the oligarchy tour thing. Do I believe that like oligarchs are like the core reason that America has problems? No. Is there an issue with money in politics? Yeah. And like, I think Bernie's messaging, there's probably still a net positive if he's turning people out to vote for Democrats.
Right. I think that's exactly right. Like like we kind of agreed upon, I don't think a lot of Bernie's policy is like particularly good. But like, like he's one of the few Democrats going out there rallying, getting people, you know, he's standing up there with AOC, getting people to rally against Trump. And by the way, listen, I don't think we're an oligarchy, but, you know, under Trump, I think that's becoming more and more, more true, right? Like we see, we see Tim Apple, you know, giving his plaque of American manufacturing to Trump to get some exemptions for tariffs and stuff like that, you know. So I think, unfortunately, getting closer and closer every day, sadly. I guess for, you know, I do want to, on Bernie's healthcare plan, by the way, I do think it is, maybe funny. I don't know if funny is the right word. You know, like Bernie always points to like Europe, you know, they have all these good health outcomes and everything. It is rather, you know, funny that like, I think Bernie's plan would have taken us from sort of like the least expansive, like public healthcare in the developed world to like literally like the most expensive.
Yeah. It covers like dental and hearing.
Yeah, exactly. It would cover like eye and dental care, which like most of these other European countries don't have. A lot of European countries don't even have single payer healthcare. They just have, you know, a public option. They have some type of managed competition. And that's even another concern, obviously, is to what extent do they, you know, free ride on our medical innovation? I think people will definitely I think people over exaggerate how much Europe free rides on us, like in general. Like they'll say like, oh, you know, Norway can have this welfare state because the U.S. has so many, you know, spends so much on its military that it protects Europe for them and everything. And it's like, well, that seems exaggerated, right? Like even if Norway had to spend like double the amount that they do on their military or whatever, they could probably raise taxes to cover that and still have their welfare state. Like, even if they cut their welfare state, it would still be like way more expensive than us. With medical care, you know, and this might tie back into the populism thing too, because Trump kind of had his executive order about this as well. You know, you do see like 70% of pharmaceutical profits are made in the U.S. Like we just pay a lot more for drugs. And that gives, you know, that gives pharma companies the money needed to do the research and development that they do. And then the European countries have their, you know, price gouging laws, price controls to bring down the cost of medicine on their side. And, you know, I guess it'd be really hard for me to envision like a single payer model that would keep the amount of medical innovation that I think we need, unless like Europe, like we came to some agreement with Europe that they had to raise their medicine prices, which I don't think would happen.
That's a fair critique. And I also think like people complain a lot about like our patent law when it comes to drugs. And there are like legitimate critiques there, but it is also kind of true that like if you want to incentivize pharmaceutical companies to like dump a lot of money into R&D, you do need to give them assurances that like as soon as they're done doing all the heavy lifting, like generics can immediately swoop in and just take the credit or like start using their formulas without having to expend all the money up front. So I think that like, and this is kind of an issue that people say where like single payer healthcare just have like lower reimbursement rates as well for like healthcare providers, and like does this affect incentive structures? And I think like the way to address that is like, number one, you could have higher reimbursements with single payer. It just would cost a lot more. But like, I think one of the reasons you see lower reimbursement rates with single payer is because once you have that like monopsony power where the only buyer of healthcare is the government, they have that negotiating power to kind of like bring prices down. And then that could maybe potentially have like an adverse effect on incentives for like innovation and like people going into the medical field, pharmaceutical field. So like my ideal single payer system, I think, would be sort of a novel one where I think like you probably have to, I think certain things, people might call it operating at a loss. But like even what I was saying with like with public options, like I think sometimes it makes sense in the short run to operate at a loss if in the long run it's going to sort of like pay off and you're going to reach equilibrium. So like even with a public option, I think run it at a loss. Like we don't have enough taxes to cover it. That's fine. Sell the insurance below break even, because in the long run that consolidates like the insurance risk pool. Everyone ends up hopping on the government plan. And then when it comes to like, is America like ensuring that these pharmaceutical companies are still profiting enough to invest sufficient amounts into R&D? I would say like just because we have single payer doesn't necessarily mean that we have to like drastically cut back on these financial incentives. Now, does that mean it's like a lot more expensive? Sure. But even there, I think like there's unique ways to price. Like once you do establish single payer, I think you can still have premiums and deductibles. But like one thing that I think could be like a good idea is like the same way we have progressive income tax rates based on your income, you could have like deductibles that are progressive rates in relation to your income. So like if you're making $35,000 a year, maybe your deductible is like 7% of your income. And if you're making like $2 million a year, maybe your deductible is like 25% of your income. And that way you still have like a funding mechanism coming in that's offsetting some of those increased costs, but you're also ensuring that like you're taking into account that wealthier people can afford more and poor people can't. So I think like when it comes to single payer, there is an over reliance to point to like Canada and like the Nordic countries and stuff.
Yeah.
And like we can pick and choose what works from them, but then also introduce novel funding mechanisms and novel reimbursement mechanisms and kind of like tinker with it and tweak it to see what works. But I do still think that like in a long run, the single payer is probably the ideal goal. And that's going to involve having a public option for probably a couple of decades in between.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess you could, like you said, just have the public option eventually outcompete, all the other insurance companies. I do think it would be hard. One of the issues with like public options, sort of in general, is that usually we do want them to perform kind of just like a social redistributive goal, where we say like the bottom 20% of Americans are going to like disproportionately be the ones in a public option because they're the ones that can't afford healthcare or whatever. And like the reason. A lot of the reason private insurers won't insure them is because it's not necessarily profitable to insure a lot of those people. You don't know if they're going to be able to pay, or they can't pay enough. And a lot of those people are, like the disabled people are probably disproportionately in the bottom 20% of the, income brackets, right? So I think it obviously would be hard to have especially at least at first, if you were only insuring, a lot of poor people, have like any type of public option be profitable. Not that you necessarily need that, because this is a social redistributive goal we're trying to achieve. Where you're trying to say like this is a market failure. We need government redistribution here to make sure people are, not dying because they don't have health care. So I think, I guess that would be like my, like if I had a public option, like I don't think I would not give it like a profit maximizing goal or anything. I think I would probably, I don't know how much I would constrain it, but I do think like the main purpose of the public option should just be like a safety net for the bottom 10-20% of people who maybe can't afford private insurance. And then, the people who are on the private insurance plans, those private insurance plans are still going to be paying more for medications. They're going to preserve at least some of the incentive for pharmaceutical companies to do the type of innovation that I think we need. Even you still might see a little bit less overall in my system, but maybe you could just directly subsidize R&D to the extent that the government can do that efficiently.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to me. One of the things that I sort of like feel like is like a fatal flaw of the public option, which is why I see it as like a transition state versus an end state, is that I can foresee a situation where the public option is exclusively covering like you were saying, the most expensive, probably unhealthy, disabled people, poor people, whatever. And then all the like younger, healthier people that cost a lot less are still on private insurance. And then Republicans can say, but well, look how cheap private insurance is. The market's working great. And look how expensive the public option is. And like all these failures for the public option. And I think like one thing that is just like a failure of having multiple providers of insurance, period, whether it's all private or a private and a public option, is that the risk pool is like so splintered up that I feel like the cost burdens are going to be like disproportionately spread out. And what I really like about single payer is that when like every single person in the country is part of the risk pool, the average cost goes down a lot. And just the overall cost goes down as well. And I think that that's one thing that a public option is like not able to achieve.
Sure. I mean, I guess it would, I guess like it would just be, like I said, I am like generally, I do think the reason a lot of medical innovation happens in the US is because pharmaceutical companies are able to profit so much off of it.
Sure.
And, so like I'm always going to want at least the Jeff Bezos of the world, to be able to buy a private insurance plan that is, pays out the ads for new expensive medication, so that eventually, hopefully that new fancy expensive medication will, what word would be funny to use here, trickle down, to the public people in the public option, right? Hopefully, as the medicine would become cheaper over time, more common, more whatever.
Yeah, that's fair. I think with like a lot of these healthcare discussions, it's always just a question of like trade-offs, because like no system is perfect. So even a public option being the end goal is like so much preferable to what we have now, where like Trump has kind of gutted the ACA's like primary funding mechanism with the individual mandate, which is like really annoying. But yeah, Democrats in general, I think, need to put a public option and just like expansion of health insurance close to the top of their agenda, because I think like it is an issue you can win on, especially a public option where there's no attack ads against a public option that say like they're trying to take away your private insurance from you. It's like, no, we're not.
They're trying to socialize healthcare, bro. That's literally socialism. Literally socialism.
Yeah.
We're literally socialist right now. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I do want to mention, now that we're in the granular discussion, okay, now that we're where I like to be instead of that stupid, what should Democrats do better on messaging?
Yeah.
I do want to ask, I did see you mention to Candice Owens, you don't think we're taxing capital gains or corporations properly. I'm curious what you mean by that, because I think we might have different ideal tax systems.
Yeah. So a couple things. So when it comes to like corporate taxes, I think corporate taxes are complicated in the sense that if you move them like by large orders of magnitude, they do change incentives such that like if the US corporate tax rate went down to like 10%, I think you would probably see a lot of foreign investment coming in, and you would see like a lot of corporations onshoring to the US. And then if you saw the corporate tax rate go up to like 50%, I think you would see a lot of capital flight from the US and a lot of corporations leaving. But I think that there's kind of like a Goldilocks zone right now in between there, where it's like if you change the corporate tax rate from like 20% to like 27%, I think whatever changes you might see are going to be like really marginal, and there's like it's not a big enough shift to like justify a corporation moving like a lot of their operations or their capital like to other states. So like when certain people on the left side say like 35 was like still too low under Obama, I think 35 is probably the upper limit of how high our corporate tax rate could be. I would want it to be more like 27, 28%. I know Trump wanted to like decrease it to like 15, which there's an argument for making it 10 or 15. But like I said, I think with like a lot of economic policy, it's all about trade-offs, like cost benefit. So like I think increasing our corporate tax rate to like between 25 and 27%, I think you benefit more than you like lose. I think you increase tax revenue marginally. I think optically it's like just a really big win. And I think there is like an anti-corporate sentiment, which is like, it's not necessarily a horrible thing to capitalize on that. And then when it comes to capital gains rates, I'm mainly talking about short-term rates. I think short-term capital gains rates should probably be higher. And I think that actually in the long run, that is going to stabilize capital markets a lot more when people aren't making short-term rates. You still want there to be like enough, like you don't want there to be so much friction that capital can't move around quickly when it needs to. But I do think that like saying that we want it, because currently I think short-term rates are equal to income rates, and then the long-term rates are like much lower. I'm okay with keeping the long-term capital gains rates lower, but I think increasing the short-term rates to be higher than the income rates just makes sense to me. So like I think the top marginal rate right now is like 37% on income, I'm pretty sure, and that would be the same for short-term capital gains rates. If we just raise like the top marginal rate on short-term capital gains to like 45% and created like a new bracket for that, I don't think that that's like really a bad thing. I think it probably brings in a little bit more revenue.
Yeah, so I guess there's kind of there'd be like two ways I look at it, right? So I think like one way would be like kind of what's politically feasible and like what is still like a net benefit. So like I was talking to I was on a panel the other day. I don't know if you're gonna know these names. Like I was talking to like Lactoid and Fabian Liberty about
I think I've heard of Fabian Liberty.
Yeah, about like the big beautiful bill and and about tariffs as well, because it was about like Trump's economy. And like something I said in there, and like it was like, I think like I think it'd be better if instead of doing the tariffs, like we just like it didn't lower or even raise slightly like the top like marginal brackets for income taxes and capital gains tax or whatever, right? Because tariffs are probably a whole lot worse than raising on the top margin 2% on the capital gains or whatever.
Right.
So like in terms of what's politically feasible and what's the net benefit, I think there are cases where I could see, that being a case where it might be good to raise corporate taxes or raise capital gains taxes. I guess when it comes to like my ideal tax system, I'm curious, have you ever heard about the wonders of a DBCFT?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, the DBCFT is like a corporate tax, but if it was good, okay, if it was good. So, obviously, I think part of the issue of a corporate tax, part of it you kind of mentioned is that, we have an origin-based tax system right now. So, we tax companies essentially based on like where they're headquartered a lot of times, and that ends up in a lot of funky situations where we're saying, if you're in Ireland, you're not really paying many taxes, and even if all your production is in the U.S. and all your sales are in the U.S., oh, I'm actually stationed in the Bahamas, right? And I think that's a issue, obviously, that incentivizes a lot of avoidance. So the destination-based part of that, you're simply taxing based on where stuff is consumed, right? So essentially, you might know a VAT is also like destination-based, right? You're taxing based on where it's consumed. So like, when people say, "Oh, Europe has a VAT and they're taxing our products when we import them," like that's part of the destination based, right? So you tax imports, which we don't currently. Well, now we do with tariffs, right? But we're taxing imports, but we're taxing them at the same rate as domestic products. So we're not artificially granting imports an advantage or domestic products an advantage. And then you would zero rate exports, which essentially just makes it equivalent. That ends up making the tax like trade neutral, right? So the destination based part makes sure, even if you're in fucking Ireland, okay, even if you say we're an Irish company, you're still paying the same tax as American companies insofar as you do business in America, insofar as consumption is in America. And then the cash flow part means you're essentially taxing you're taxing companies on their cash flow. So an issue with the corporate tax right now is it's not technically supposed to like affect investment and stuff like that, but because of we have like depreciation schedules that don't always let you fully exempt everything. It does end up having some incidence on investment, some incidence on even wages, on prices, right? So the cash flow tax avoids that by just allowing companies to immediately fully expense their investments. This is actually the one.
That's one part of the TCJ I like, yeah,
exactly. The one I think it was expanded a little bit in the Big Beautiful Bill too. I think it was only for like R&D or whatever, but cash flow tax would like it expands it for everyone, right, or for everything, right? So like if you spend $10,000 on investment, that's immediately deductible because you're simply taxed on whether you have a positive or negative cash flow at the end of the year. And I think that way you avoid any of the negative incidents that we have on prices, less wages, things like investment, which is just like overall really good things. And I would apply kind of the same logic to the capital gains tax. Like I think just like building capital is like a good thing. Like I want companies to be able to raise capital. I think it makes us more productive. I think it has a lot of spillover benefits. I think even when rich billionaires save or whatever, that is broad positive spillovers that they're investing in venture capital and things like that. I think the issues that we have with billionaires are usually their ludicrous consumption. The fact that Jeff Bezos buys a $100 billion super yacht while people are homeless, right? So I think that to me provides a pretty good justification for a consumption tax and or a DBCFT over taxing capital gains and corporate income.
Sure. I mean, I like the sound of both of those systems. I guess I would also just assume that switching like one thing that I think of when I think of tax policy is like, unfortunately, I feel like changing what types of taxes we collect on like a very foundational level just requires a lot more political capital than tweaking the existing sort of like streams that already exist. One idea that I have had about the corporate tax rate that I think could be interesting, it's like I haven't fleshed it out a lot, is like and this could be a great thing to like also just market politically, is like create something called like the American Dream Standard, something along those lines. And it includes like a certain wage, certain benefits, whatever. It's like a package of wage tied to cost of living, benefits, all this stuff. And then basically say that any corporation that ensures that like their lowest earning employee is meeting the American Dream Standard gets like a 10% corporate tax rate, something like that, which is like the sort of line of argumentation from Republicans is like, if you cut corporate taxes, they're going to reinvest into capital and into employees. And maybe on like the margins, like you're saying, like there's definitely some instances where that can happen. But I think on the aggregate, they mostly engage in like stock buybacks, which like that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's reasoning behind buying back stock, but there's also, you can argue, more productive ways to spend that money other than stock buybacks if you're thinking from like a social welfare perspective and not just that company. So like I think having that system would ensure that if you are going to offer corporations lower rates, you are actually going to get something out of it that's like materially guaranteed. And I think that is like probably a lot better than taking it on faith that they're going to make certain investments. When it comes to like consumption based and cash flow based taxes, that also does strike me as just being more efficient and just making more sense than like you're saying, like with right now with like headquartering and just like even expensing. There are certain aspects of our tax code that I don't really understand what the thought process was in like establishing them, or like whether people considered the adverse effects of having those things. So my broad sort of like stance on taxes is like, in an ideal world, I'm kind of agnostic as to what specific taxes we want. I'm just trying to think like, how do we maximize revenue with minimizing the distortionary impact on like markets in general? And like whatever the empirical data shows is like the best way to do that is what I'm gonna end up supporting. When it comes to like, I think there is an aspect of taxation which is kind of virtue signaling from the government, which is you have to be able to kind of tell people that like these rich people with their yachts are paying their fair share and you're paying less. I feel like that has to be an aspect of it, at least just facially, because if you fall into the rhetoric of like the Republican tax rhetoric of like we have to incentivize corporations, and there's like some truth to that, sure, but I think like politically that ground has just been monopolized by Republicans. So like you always have to frame it as like we're fighting inequality, which you should be, but you also have to, like you're saying, take into account we want businesses to invest in R&D. We want them to invest in capital, and like we don't want expensing schedules to act as like some kind of disincentive to engage in certain behavior. So yeah, a lot of this is just like technocratic minutia, which unfortunately these are not the conversations we're going to be hearing on the primary debate stage in 2028, let alone the general election debate stage. But I do hope that these are the types of conversations that Democrats are having behind the scenes, which they're almost certainly not. But you know, like this is what I would like to see be the debate in the Democratic Party, is like which taxes are we raising, like where, how. But I feel like right now, unfortunately, there is no. I feel like they're running around like when you cut off like a chicken's head and just starts running around, doesn't know where it's going or what it's doing. That's kind of what I'm seeing right now from the party. So the more we have this conversation, the more black-pilled I feel about our political movement actually being able to achieve results. But
right, like I think, you know, like I agree, like a lot of this is like politically, like I don't want to say never gonna happen, but like almost like never gonna happen. Like there was at one point a Republican plan for a DBCFT, but like it didn't even get out of committee, and you would have to try to sell to voters, and like I don't know, I don't think that's gonna happen. Like truly, I also just don't think that most Democratic politicians are like that informed on a lot of these things. Like I think they, you know, either have like preconceived beliefs or they have certain like think tanks talking to them or whatever that might not always be on the optimal policy. You know, they're not digging through the data and finding empirically what taxes have the minimum deadweight loss. They're you know, trying to figure out how to message best on how to message best on these things.
I think if you polled Congress and asked them what a deadweight loss is, I don't think the responses would be like very heartening. Yeah, not many
would know that. How many? I'm curious on optimal tax policy before we move on a little bit. Are you LVT pilled as well? Do you support the glorious
land value tax?
Of course,
yeah. I think like it obviously depends how you implement it, but like on a top line level, yeah, I definitely think that seems like a good idea. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Now we just need to figure out how to get the Democrats to figure out what a land value tax is. How do we get them to read Henry's speech?
Yeah.
But I think you're right about Democrats to some extent running around like a headless chicken right now. Like obviously, I'm curious what you think of the fact that I never did a ton of reading into this, that the Democrats were like spending their, $20 million on like a survey to try to figure out why young men are leaving the Democratic Party. That's not something I have strong opinions on, but I'm curious to know what you believe about it.
I have very strong opinions on that. I actually see the exodus of Gen Z men towards the Republican Party as like one of the most existential threats the Democratic Party faces, because like I watched it happen in real time. I have like I watch a lot of UFC, for example. I'm like a huge UFC fan. And anyone who watches UFC will tell you it's like MAGA just monopolized that entire sport. It's actually insane that there's like in these certain cultural spaces. And like I watch a lot of podcasts as well. Like I'll watch sometimes, as much as I hate them, like the Nelk podcast if they have an interesting guest, or like the Andrew Schultz podcast. Like I like Andrew Schultz. Even Rogan, like sometimes here and there I'll watch him. And it's like, to some extent, are these podcast hosts like right-wing tools? Yes. But also it's like no one who can push back on that is even going on to the shows. And then like I watched it happen in slow motion over the summer of 2024. Like all these spaces I'm in, I look at the podcast comments, I'm watching like UFC commentary, and it's all just like right-wing framing, right-wing politics being injected into everything. And I'm like, no shit, these people are not going to vote for Democrats. They don't even know what a Democrat is other than the caricature that they've heard from Dana White, who's like best friends with Trump and also like the president of the UFC. And like a survey is not going to fix that. I feel like Democrats are just culturally clueless. They don't understand how to interface with pop culture at all. And I think MAGA specifically, is really good at like mixing itself into like pop culture stuff. And like inviting Taylor Swift and Meg Thee Stallion to like a Kamala rally is just not adequate to like combat that, I think. So like there's all these things where like, for example, like one thing that I think Trump did really well, which appealed to young men, even though it's extremely stupid, his whole thing, and I honestly think that maybe you'll disagree with this, I think pre-Kamala Harris, like when Biden was still the nominee, I think Trump's 2024 campaign was actually his strongest messaging-wise, more than 2016, more than 2020, because he fundamentally, I think, was able to market himself, although this isn't true, as like, I'm just a common sense guy. I'm not ideological. Like, I just want common sense. We have a border. He frames things in a way where it's almost like the premise is a given, and it's not ideological when he says it. It's just common sense problem solving, which I think is like very effective messaging. And like, I think one of the reasons young men are leaving the Democratic Party is like Democrats, at least optically in those circles towards those groups, come off as being these like weird ideologues who are just not attached to reality, and all they care about is like these theories and these like social systems and hierarchies and like what's socially constructed and what isn't. And Republicans are like, listen, we just want to solve the problems. We just want common sense reform. We obviously have a border. We obviously have businesses. We want to raise wages. And like the way they talk about it is just so appealing to someone who is like just dipping their toes into politics. Like when I first got involved in politics, when I was like 15, 14 years old, I was a huge right-wing guy because their messaging is just so potent and they distill their message down so well. We're like, yeah, Ben Shapiro says like, wait, taxes are unfair? Yeah, obviously they're unfair. Like they just frame it so well. And like Democrats need to start engaging in pop culture stuff. And then also, I think this might just be like an issue with our bench is like, say it with your chest, like have conviction when you talk about stuff. Don't be so afraid and so risk averse constantly. I think Democrats right now are so risk averse that they're always trying to triangulate like what's the perfect way to say this thing and like what's the and they have all these consultants and stuff, and it's like, dude, Trump doesn't have a fucking consultant. Exactly. Trump's own team doesn't know what he's about to say when he goes on the Andrew Schultz podcast, and that's probably a good thing because as brain dead as Trump is, the one thing you can say when you hear Trump speak is like, no one probably told him to say that. He's just saying whatever the fuck comes to his head. And people really like seeing that. So like, I want to see, like, people say, who's the Joe Rogan of the left? That's the wrong question. The question is, how do you take the existing Joe Rogan and utilize his platform to push people to the left rather than trying to create from the ground up something that he created over the course of like a decade and a half, right? So I want to see Democrats going on, and Buttigieg did this to his credit, going on like the Flagrant podcast, the Joe Rogan podcast, send Obama to a UFC event or something, right? Like he goes to these NBA games, send Obama. Like we have popular people that are in our camp, use them. This is one thing that has really pissed me off about Obama is like, I like Obama as like a guy. He seems like a very smart guy. but he's just been absent in this Trump era. And then he pops up every once in a while to like scold us, and his scolding was accurate. Like, I don't know if you heard like the leaked conversation he had with like the DNC people, where he was like, stop being like so sensitive, and like the abundance people and the populist people are actually kind of on the same side, because if you want to build affordable housing, you have to go through the abundance agenda to get it done. Like, and he's right about that, but it's like, where are you? Like, why are you not like on every single show ever? Because honestly, the only person Democrats have right now that can combat Trump in terms of like the cult of personality and like people are tuning in to see what he says is kind of Obama. And it bothers me that he's not like our main messenger right now, which like, sure, he can't run for a third term, but like until we figure out who's the next guy, use the guy we already have. So like, I think it does just come down to like the reason young men are going to this side and the reason their messaging works so well. It's half of it is the message, maybe less than half. I think the big bulk of it is the messenger, which is like some people, and this is why I like Mamdani, whether or not you like his policies on rent, Mamdani is an extremely skilled politician. Like, he's amazingly skilled, great speaker. He just comes off as like a really jolly, happy guy, which is like plays very well. Everyone I know, literally everyone I know who doesn't follow politics at all, they come and ask me, who's that Mamdani guy? I really like him. He seems like a nice guy. It seems like he actually cares about these issues. And I think that's more so how you win elections than like, is your tax plan going to raise revenues? Like, unfortunately, but that's kind of where it stands.
Listen, the real taker case that Obama and Michelle should both run for Senate. Okay. Can you imagine husband and wife ticket? Okay. The fucking Obama.
I would like to see Obama run for, because you can be speaker whether or not you're actually in Congress, right? Imagine Democrats take back the House and Obama's like the speaker. I would love to see that happen.
That would be good. Let's go. Yeah, that's the real take. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I think I agree with most of that. I think and again, I do think it's a frustrating thing that we Democrats kind of have to deal with that. And I think, it seems like, and again, like, I don't focus that much on like the best Democratic strategy. I like talking about more granular stuff, but it does really seem like a lot of people just view, especially the like establishment, more moderate Democrats, as like just like very untrustworthy, right? Like, Kamala flip-flopped on all these things, right? Kamala did a coup, right? She, got into the, she was the candidate, but she wasn't really
during
elected.
The prisons trans. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. All the flip-flops since 2019 or whatever. Everyone covered up Biden's age, right? And I think I
think that's a valid critique, but we can maybe get to that later.
I mean, I think that's I think that is to some extent a valid critique. I think it depends on which people you're talking about. Like, obviously, I think like the people within the Biden administration like probably knew more than they let on. Now, like, I don't know, like truthfully, like I don't know when like Elizabeth Warren, people like that were like talking about Biden. I don't know how many interactions they had with Biden. So like, I don't know if they were just going off what people had told them. Or
I think it's the inner circle that deserves a lot. I don't know if you followed like Jake Tapper's new book, Original Sin or whatever. He did like a whole podcast circuit on it. Basically, during the election, no one in the Democratic Party was willing to do interviews about Biden's condition because they were like, literally anything we say right now is going to hurt us in the election. But according to Jake Tapper, like the second the votes were counted and Trump won, everyone all of a sudden was willing to do interviews. And like there were people on the Biden team that he asked them, if you guys got like the infamous like 4 a.m. phone call, like there's some crisis happening, would you guys have felt confident that Biden could handle it? And they were like, no, we actually were pretty concerned that Biden was not really like paying attention. And one issue that Biden had, from what I can tell, is that when it came to issues that he cared about, he was pretty involved, doing a pretty good job. But then anything else, he was just completely lost, right? So like he was pretty involved in like the Ukraine stuff. It seems like he cares a lot about NATO, just genuinely. So like if you ask him questions about NATO stuff, he give you pretty in-depth answers. But then I'm forgetting which Democratic senator it was that went and asked him like, hey, like, what are we going to do about like the border stuff? Because it is kind of hurting you. And like, it does seem like our infrastructure right now can't handle all the asylum claims that are coming in. And according to him, like Biden just gave him like this lost look and just didn't really know what was going on and didn't really seem to focus on it. So I do blame Biden very heavily for running for re-election. I think they probably knew in like 2022 that like we probably shouldn't run for re-election. It's just not going to work out. After the Afghanistan pullout, he never really recovered in his polling favorability numbers. And like I got into like a lot of moderate Dems were really mad at me last year because I was very early on, as early as like October of 2023, saying Biden should not run for re-election. Like this is like a very clear disaster waiting to happen. And I think I posted about it in like Destiny's subreddit, and I got bludgeoned. I got attacked everywhere. Biden is going to win, incumbent advantage. And it's like, dude, the incumbency can be a disadvantage if people are like really upset with the status quo, right? Like, just ask Trump in 2020, right? Like if the country is going to shit, people are not happy with the incumbent. So I agree that I don't want to spend time dwelling on Biden when there's like a literal fascist takeover happening. So I don't talk about it a lot. But if someone does ask me about it and it comes up, I do think that the Biden team specifically deserves a lot of shit for how they handled everything that happened, even after he dropped out. I don't know if you know, like the behind the scenes stuff that happened where like Pelosi and Obama wanted to do an open convention. That was kind of like the talk that was happening in the Democratic circles. And then because Biden was butthurt about being pushed out of the race, his like final fuck you to them was, without telling anyone, just tweeting out a press release saying, I've endorsed Kamala Harris. And Obama was blindsided, Pelosi was blindsided, like, what the hell is this? And I think, like, have you watched, I would recommend watching this on stream, honestly. Very, very interesting documentary. It's a PBS Frontline documentary about like Biden's career. And it kind of goes over like behind the scenes what was happening. And Biden has this like, probably anyone who becomes president has this, but this like Messiah complex where it's like, I was chosen for this role and like only I can do it. And like my entire life has led up to this moment where like I'm now the most powerful man on earth. And like Biden comes from like a lot of personal tragedy. Like his wife died, his kids died, and like he's been through a lot. His son Bo, his son Hunter, and like he has this complex in his head that like all this suffering was for a reason. It's because now I'm president and I'm the only one who can defeat Trump. And I think drinking that Kool-Aid too much and then all his inner circle gassing him up with that stuff kind of fucked us for 2024 a little bit. Would we have won with a Buttigieg or a Whitmer or a Newsom? Maybe not, but I think we probably would have done better with those candidates than we did with Kamala, and definitely than we would have done with Biden. Right. We had internal polling coming out of Democrats. I don't know if you saw this.
Some of it,
which showed Biden losing, I think, like Minnesota and like New Jersey. And it's like, what the fuck are we doing? If you guys had these numbers, why did you stay in the race? It just doesn't make sense to me.
That is, as much as I, like Biden, okay, I got the Biden head behind me, obviously, which, I bought that after he dropped out just because I knew they were going to get rid of it and I needed it, my phone was covered. But, so I do think like that is probably like my biggest issue with Biden's. It really just does seem like he like had a big ego and like he like, just really did not want to drop out, wanted to control, what happened to obviously the, Democratic convention after he did finally agree to drop out. And like, I don't know where he got that complex from, but for whatever reason, that was the big thing. And I think, like obviously, like I agree, like some people definitely just in the administration definitely deserve criticism. The big issue it's created, like I said, is that people now view like almost like all Democrats is like untrustworthy, right? They're all pro-establishment. They all covered up Biden's age. They all blah 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 blah.
And that's gonna stick.
I don't know how to overcome that. Like truthfully,
I think the way to overcome that is unfortunately employ what Trump did in the 2016 Republican primary, which is like you kind of have to throw some of the people in the party under the bus as like a gesture of goodwill to the average person that like, I'm not like them, they not like us, whatever. Like you have to be able to say to them that like, yes, people in the party lied about Biden. He made mistakes. I also think on the issue of Gaza, which I don't know where you stand on that I think polling just came out that like, it's like 8% now of the Democratic base supports what Israel's currently doing in Gaza. So like, I don't think that it's a winning issue to run on the Biden framework of dealing with the Middle East right now. Whoever is the nominee in 2028 needs to just make certain concessions up front so that they can't be used as attacks against you later on by the Republicans. So like lead with it. Lead with saying in the primary, our party has like been fucking up, like come up with your whole like I'm an outsider shtick, whatever. That works, especially when people, like you're saying, like have this feeling about the party, and then leverage that to strengthen the party in the end. Because as much as Trump shit on the Republican old guard in 2016, like Rubio is like now Secretary of State. So like he actually, by shitting on the Republican Party, made it stronger in the end electorally. And I think Democrats have to do a similar thing, which is like, until you're willing to gesture verbally that you're willing to clean up house and like hold your own party accountable, people are just not going to take you seriously. And maybe that means conceding certain things you don't want to concede, but I think it probably strategically makes a lot more sense.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I definitely could see something like that working. Like I said, you know, I don't spend a ton of time researching that like myself, but you know, it does. Sure. You know, I guess that, you know, we might need to choose some sacrificial lambs. Okay, might need to get rid of some of the old. Listen, the boomers can be our sacrificial lamb. We shouldn't have half these fucking boomers in office anyway.
The gerontocracy,
exactly. Anyone that's above 80, just fucking fuck them. Get them out of here.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. My sacrificial lambs for 2028 are going to be probably Biden and Israel if I had to pick two. That's what I would say. But
yeah. And hopefully, truly, like I don't, you know, I don't know how true this is, but like truthfully, I really question the effectiveness of like if there were like Republican attack ads and like Democrats like having like a slightly less pro-Israel position, like I really don't know how many people that would appeal to. Like I don't know, like if Kamala Harris like advocate for ceasefire.
Like, one thing you can look at this to see is like and this was like the breakout moment for Mamdani is when they asked him like, where would you first visit as mayor? And he was, everyone in the thing said Israel. And then he was like, I would just go to Brooklyn because like I'm mayor of New York, which is like, no shit. Like people like hearing that. And then I thought he answered the next question flawlessly, which is they asked him, does Israel have a right to exist? Which is like, you know, every leftist fears this question for some reason, but like he just said like, Israel has a right to exist as a state with equal rights, which is like such a good way of answering that question, which is like, I'm not saying like kill all the Jews or something. Like that's how Republicans want to frame it. I'm just saying that like people in Gaza starving is probably not a good thing, right? Like kids dying in Gaza, probably not a great thing. And like when you frame it that way, like it's very hard to argue against that. I think like even public opinion polls now, to sound like Cenk for a second, like people are not happy with what's going on in Gaza. Like aid is being blocked off and like kids are dying, like doctors are coming back telling us horror stories. I think it probably is a winning issue to say, you know what, probably should move towards a Palestinian state. We can also oppose Hamas, that's fine, like no one likes Hamas here, but like you can move towards a Palestinian state, also say I oppose terrorism, and then also say that what's been happening over the last couple of years with Israel's offensive in Gaza has been a net negative that has, if anything, I think strengthened radicalist sentiment in the Middle East in a kind of counterintuitive way. I would argue that Hamas is more popular now than it was on October 6th.
I mean, they might be, who are they more popular among, I guess, but it like,
definitely in Western countries, right? Like I think with younger people, especially, like they've definitely picked up a lot of clout because it's like the underdog effect is like when kids are being bombed and hospitals being blown up, like it's kind of easy for the terrorist group to say we're actually just a rebel group, bro. We're just fighting the oppressors. And like, is that true? No, but does it resonate more when that's the background behind them? Kind of, unfortunately, but
no, I think that's definitely true. Yeah, I do have one last tangent for you, all right?
Sure.
Have you heard of the glorious Shrimp Welfare Project?
I have not. I was wondering what that was behind you, but I guess now I know it's a shrimp and it's on welfare apparently.
Yeah, this is a shrimp costume, for the glorious Shrimp Welfare Project. Gotta promote my two biggest beliefs, Biden and shrimp welfare, all right? So, currently, the way most farm shrimp are killed, they're killed in what's called ice slurries, where they're essentially they'll like lay down a layer of ice, they'll put a layer of shrimp down, put another layer of ice down, right? So these shrimp are being suffocated and freezing to death at the same time in these ice slurries. Takes about 20 minutes for them to die. Horrible way for them to die, all right? Luckily, we have these electrical stunning machines, all right, that we can probably painlessly, if it's not painless, it's a very immediate death with probably not that much pain. Stun the shrimp before they're put out on these ice slurries, And for just a single $1, all right, you can save about 1,500 shrimp per year for about 10 years from dying these painful deaths, all right? And even if I know what you're thinking, why the fuck do I care about shrimp? Can shrimp even feel pain? Even if they do feel pain, Is it at all comparable to humans? Okay.
Yeah.
Best evidence we have says that shrimp probably feel pain, right? We observe that like when we, they'll tend to their wounds, but they'll do it a lot less when we give them painkillers. They can make trade-offs between like how much pain they're willing to accept to get a certain reward. They'll remember places that hurt them and they won't go back there. So there seems to be a lot of decent evidence that shrimp can feel pain. And I think probably what's more important is that like the sort of the best arguments for saying that shrimp don't feel pain is simply that like we just don't have evidence in some places, sure. Right? So we just don't have experiments. Almost any time we do, as far as I know, literally every time we've done an experiment, like it's pointed us into the direction that shrimp and decapods generally can feel pain. All right.
Sure.
And now, even if we say that shrimp suffer about 3.1% as intensely as humans do, which I would say is a conservative estimate that's based on a report from a think tank called Rethink Priorities. Okay, they did a ton of research into this, came to their best estimate. That's a pretty conservative estimate. Because of how many shrimp, just because of how effective the Shrimp Welfare Project is in saving so many shrimp, it's like just a really, really good charity to donate to.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you should send me a link to that. I'm happy to donate to something like that. And I'm actually like, I like animal rights stuff. I think like factory farming generally is probably pretty bad, and like there's a lot of abuses that go on. I just think it's like, it's probably not going to change in the immediate future. I mean, there's obviously charities that do good work like this, but on like a more structural level, if we're just talking about like animal suffering, I think it probably would be a good idea to build some political will behind like ending like gas chambers for pigs and stuff. But it seems to me like that's, at least in the political conversation, not somewhere we're going to get until we've kind of answered all the human problems first. And then people will maybe care enough to vote based on like what a chicken wants to do. But I mean, yeah, I definitely support. I did not know that shrimp went through that kind of ordeal before, but I guess my horizons have been widened after hearing that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And they live pretty bad lives on farms usually as well. Like there's a thing called like eye stalk ablation, where like they remove the eyes from live female shrimp to make them more fertile. Wow. And that obviously hurts the shrimp that's alive, but also tends to have like negative effects on their offspring.
I'm just surprised that makes them more fertile. I don't know what the correlation would be between having
there's some like hormone in their eyes that, like reduces their fertility. And if you remove them, they're like artificially more fertile. And that tends to have negative effects on both them and their offspring. Like their offspring are like disproportionately like disabled and things like that. And the Shrimp Welfare Project also tries to make sure that a bunch of farmers don't do that. They also remove, they have a project where like they remove a bunch of like sludge from ponds in India or something, and it makes shrimp's lives more happy, like while they're in the wild. Just because of like how cost effective this charity is. Like I think it's just I think it's like the perfect combination of like comical in that like it's just sounds on its face absurd to like help a bunch of shrimp, but because it's so comically effective, like it makes up for it. Yeah, I love it so much. It is so goated. You should. I can.
And $1 does what? Like how far does it go?
So $1. So there's a bit of It depends like which estimates you take. So $1 probably it stuns like I think the median is like 1,500 shrimp per year for like an expected 10 years. Now in some cases maybe it's only 8 years because the machine they had breaks down a little sooner or whatever. But $1 probably helps about 15,000 shrimp avoid a painful death, like on average. Wow. And that's and
those are big numbers.
Exactly. I don't remember the stats and like how far $1 goes to stop like eye stalk ablation and all those other negative practices. But overall, very good, very good charity that I like to propagandize people about.
Yeah, I definitely. I'll have to spread the word about that one.
Hell yeah. Okay, well, anything else you want to shout out? Anything you want to tell my fans or?
I mean, yeah, you can just find me Adam Khan on TikTok. I don't know what my exact username is. You can just search that up, and then my link tree is there. That has all my other stuff like YouTube. Probably starting a podcast soon-ish, and then
yeah, hell yeah. I'll make sure to link your stuff when I upload this on my YouTube channel.
Cool.
Yeah, really appreciate having on. Sure, I'll talk to you again
sometime.
Yeah,
for sure.
You have you have like general perms in the server. I don't know if you're gonna stick around or whatever, but like I think you have perms to join this room whenever if you really want to. So
cool.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on. I'm sure I'll talk to you again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, take care.
You too. Yep. If you want to chat with me live, sub here or go to Nonfon420 on Twitch or Kick via the links below. Once again, please like and sub to help with the algorithm, and consider sending a donation through YouTube Super Thanks to directly support me, and I'll make sure to reply to any question you ask. See you guys next time.